She mistook a Mafia boss for the maintenance guy fixing the elevator, but that mistake changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into today's tale. Sophia had just finished a long day of back-to-back meetings at her high-powered law firm in downtown Chicago. She had been pushing herself for weeks, running on little sleep and even less free time. Today, however, she had something she was looking forward to, a dinner at one of the city's finest restaurants. As she approached the elevator in her office building, she quickly checked her watch. She was running behind, as usual. Great, she muttered under her breath, pushing the elevator button frantically. The doors slid open and she stepped inside, hoping for a smooth ride down. But as soon as the doors closed, the elevator jolted to a halt. The lights flickered, and then, complete silence. Sophia sighed, pressing the emergency button. Nothing happened. This is just perfect, she groaned, leaning back against the elevator wall. She fumbled with her phone, but there was no signal. As she stared at her reflection in the polished elevator door, she couldn't help but think of how her life had become a constant rush. Her job demanded everything from her, leaving little room for anything else, especially love. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her nerves. Then, a voice broke through her thoughts. Is everything all right in there? Sophia turned quickly, startled. Standing outside the elevator doors was a man she hadn't seen before, dressed in a simple, slightly worn maintenance uniform. He had a calm, approachable demeanor as he leaned in to speak. I'm here to fix the elevator. Oh, thank God, she said with relief, trying to mask her frustration. The man pushed the button to open the doors, then stepped inside. Don't worry, it's just a small issue. I'll have it fixed in no time, he said, his voice steady and reassuring. She gave a nervous laugh, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to sound so panicked. Just a long day. It's all right. I get it, he said with a slight smile, kneeling down to inspect the machinery. His presence was calm, but something about him seemed different. His hands moved expertly, and Sophia found herself watching him, oddly fascinated by how composed he seemed. Despite the stress of the situation, she felt a sense of ease in his presence. They exchanged small talk as he worked. He mentioned that he had been working in the building for several years, but he didn't seem to know much about the people in it. His voice was low and smooth, and his easygoing nature had a strange effect on her. She found herself speaking more than she normally would, rambling about her hectic schedule and how she missed out on simple things, like enjoying dinner without stress. I guess it's hard to slow down when you're always running ahead, she said with a small laugh. He paused for a moment, looking at her with an expression that was hard to read. I think sometimes you need to stop running and just breathe, he replied softly. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she wondered if she was imagining it, but something in his eyes made her believe he understood. Before she could respond, the elevator suddenly hummed to life again. The doors slid open, and Sophia was taken aback. She looked at him one last time. Thanks, she said, still in a bit of a daze. He smiled. No problem. Take care, he said as she stepped out. But as she walked away, something tugged at her, a nagging feeling that there was more to this man than he was letting on. Little did she know, that brief encounter would set into motion a series of events that would change her life forever. The man she had just spoken to was no ordinary maintenance worker. He was, in fact, the Mafia boss, James Carter, a name that would soon become entwined with her future in a way she couldn't yet understand. The following days after Sophia's brief encounter with the elevator repairman, her life seemed to return to its usual grind. She pushed the memory of the calm stranger out of her mind, as she had no reason to believe she would ever see him again. Work had been demanding, as always, and the stress of juggling endless meetings, phone calls, and deadlines kept her occupied. But in the quiet moments, when the office was empty and the hum of the city outside faded, her thoughts would wander back to that encounter. The way the man had looked at her with those calm eyes, how he had made her feel for just a moment that there was more to life than the rush. She shook her head, scolding herself for entertaining such thoughts. After all, he was just a maintenance worker. She had no reason to think he was anything more. That was until she ran into him again. It happened completely by accident. Sophia had just arrived at a gala hosted by one of the city's wealthiest and most influential families, a gathering of people she had only heard of in whispers around the office. She had been invited as a guest of honor for her recent pro bono work, and though she was grateful for the recognition, she could not shake the feeling of being out of place. As she stepped into the grand ballroom, she was instantly struck by the opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, and the scent of expensive perfumes and freshly uncorked wine lingered. Sophia tugged at the hem of her gown, adjusting it nervously as she scanned the crowd for familiar faces. She had barely taken a step when a voice, deep and confident, caught her attention. "Sophia, it's so good to finally meet you in person." She turned to see the host of the evening, an older man with silver hair and a kind smile, standing with a well-dressed man beside him. "This is James Carter," the host continued, gesturing toward the man. "He's been a friend of the family for years." Her heart stopped. The man standing before her was none other than the same person she had met in the elevator. The man who had fixed the elevator with such ease and calm. The one who had made her feel as if life could be slow and unhurried for just a moment. She stared at him, unable to hide her surprise. James Carter, Mafia boss, CEO of Carter Enterprises, and one of the most powerful men in the city. "I had no idea we would meet again," Sophia managed to say, her voice a little shaky. James smiled, his eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "It's a small world," he said softly, his voice low and smooth. "I didn't expect to run into you here either." The conversation shifted to the event, but Sophia's mind was racing. How was this possible? How had she, a lowly lawyer, ended up in the same room as the infamous James Carter? She had no idea that the man she had spoken to so casually in the elevator was hiding such a powerful identity. But as the night wore on, she found herself drawn to him. His calm demeanor, his quiet confidence, it was impossible to ignore. Throughout the evening, they exchanged glances and brief words, but every time she looked at him, she felt a pull that she couldn't explain. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her want to know more. By the end of the night, she had managed to slip away from the crowd for a moment of solitude on the balcony. The city skyline stretched before her, the lights twinkling like stars in the distance. The cool breeze ruffled her hair as she took a deep breath. She needed a moment to process everything that had happened. As she stood there, lost in thought, she felt a presence behind her. She turned, and there he was, James Carter, stepping out onto the balcony, looking every bit the powerful figure he was. "I didn't expect to find you out here," he said, his voice steady, like everything about him was measured and controlled. Sophia smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I needed a break from the madness in there." James nodded, taking a step closer. "I understand. Sometimes it feels like the world is moving too fast." There was a pause, and then he added, "You're more than just a lawyer, aren't you, Sophia? I can see it in your eyes." She turned toward him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice softer now. James stepped a little closer, his presence commanding, yet somehow gentle. "You're not like the others in there. You don't belong to that world, but you've made your mark in it. You're different, and I respect that." Sophia felt a flutter in her chest, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. There was something about his words, the way he spoke to her, that made her feel like she mattered in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I never thought I'd be here, not in a place like this." James gave her a small smile, his eyes softening for a moment. "You belong here as much as anyone else." Sophia looked away, unsure of how to respond. Everything about this situation felt too surreal. How had a simple elevator malfunction led to this? And why did she feel like she was standing on the edge of something bigger than herself? As the night drew to a close, Sophia was left with more questions than answers. She couldn't shake the feeling that James Carter, the man who had once been just a maintenance worker to her, was someone far more complicated and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The days that followed the gala were filled with a strange mixture of curiosity and confusion for Sophia. She couldn't shake the memory of her conversation with James Carter, the man who had once appeared as a humble maintenance worker in the elevator, only to reveal himself as the infamous Mafia boss behind one of the most powerful families in the city. Everything about him seemed to draw her in, yet she couldn't fully understand why. She had always been a woman who valued control, structure, and logic in her life. But something about James unsettled that. She found herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit. Was it just his presence? His mysterious nature? Or was it something deeper, something she had yet to uncover? She tried to focus on her work, throwing herself into her cases, hoping it would keep her distracted. But every time her mind wandered, it always seemed to land back on James. His words, the way he saw her, there was something in his gaze that made her feel like she was seen in a way she had never been before. A few days after the gala, James reached out to her. He didn't ask for anything. In fact, he offered something unexpected. He invited her to a private dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, known for its high-profile clientele. The invitation felt like an extension of the moment on the balcony, an extension of something that had barely begun but already felt like it could be life-changing. I thought we could continue our conversation from the other night. His message read, I'd like to get to know you better, Sophia. At first, she hesitated. Should she accept? Was this some kind of game for him? Was he testing her, seeing how much she could be drawn into his world? But then she thought about the connection they had shared. The way he made her feel like she was more than just a lawyer fighting through the grind of corporate life. He had seen something in her, and maybe it was time to see what he saw. So she agreed. When the night came, she arrived at the restaurant, a place known for its seclusion and the luxury that oozed from every corner. James was already there, seated at a table by the window, the city skyline stretching before them like a painting. He looked as composed and untouchable as ever, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made her feel oddly at ease. As she walked toward him, he stood and greeted her with a slight bow, his usual confidence tempered with a gentleness that caught her off guard. Sophia, he said with a smile, his voice low and smooth. I'm glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it, she replied, her voice betraying a hint of nerves. They sat down, and the evening unfolded with a surprising ease. They spoke not just about business or the usual topics that filled the space of a dinner conversation, but about their lives, their pasts. James revealed small details about his upbringing, his struggles, his rise to power, and the loneliness that came with being at the top. People always think I have everything, he said, his eyes darkening for a moment. Money, power, influence. But in truth, all of that means nothing when you're alone. It's just noise. People don't see the person behind all of it. Sophia looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw more than just the Mafia boss. She saw the vulnerability behind his facade, the isolation that had driven him to build an empire that seemed to have no purpose but to protect him from feeling anything real. I never thought about it like that, she admitted, her voice soft. I guess we all have our own battles. The night continued, and they spoke more about their dreams, their regrets, their ambitions. There was a connection that went beyond the surface, a connection that felt deeper than anything Sophia had ever experienced. As the evening came to a close, James surprised her again. I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night on the balcony, he said, his voice serious now. You said that you wanted to slow down, to breathe. I think you deserve that. You don't have to be in this high-speed race all the time, you know. You have a choice. His words hit her harder than she expected. The truth was, she had always been running, always chasing the next big case, the next promotion, the next milestone. But maybe he was right. Maybe there was more to life than that. Sophia sat in silence for a moment, contemplating his words. I've been so focused on proving myself, she said quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of her wine glass. But maybe I've forgotten why I started in the first place. James reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. It's never too late to remember, he said, his voice soft. There was a moment of stillness between them, and for the first time, Sophia felt the weight of the choice before her. Was she ready to slow down? Was she ready to step away from the life she had built, from the walls she had put up, and embrace something, or someone, that might change everything? James' touch lingered for a moment longer before he pulled his hand back. Whatever you decide, he said with a small smile, I'll be here. The night ended with the city lights twinkling below, but the weight of the decision Sophia had to make was still heavy in her heart. She left the restaurant with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Her life was no longer just about the race. James had opened a door, and now it was up to her whether or not to walk through it. It had been a few weeks since Sophia and James' dinner at the exclusive restaurant, but the memory of that night stayed with her. In the days that followed, she had tried to focus on her work, but a strange shift had occurred inside her. She no longer felt the same rush to climb higher, to prove herself in the world of law. James' words, his offer of a different kind of life, had planted a seed in her mind, a seed that was now starting to grow. She couldn't stop thinking about what it would mean to slow down, to take a step back from the relentless pursuit of success. But could she truly leave behind everything she had worked for? The answer wasn't clear, and she found herself at a crossroads. As time passed, James kept in touch, but it wasn't in the way she had expected. He didn't pressure her to make decisions or act hastily. Instead, he offered quiet support, subtly guiding her toward her own answers. There was no grand gesture, no overt declarations of affection, just an unspoken understanding that whatever path she chose, he would be there. It was during one of these moments that Sophia began to truly see him, not as the mafia boss he appeared to be, but as a man who had built his empire with strength and cunning, yet also with a certain loneliness that he hid behind his power. One evening, after another long day of meetings and paperwork, Sophia found herself at a charity event hosted by one of her law firm's partners. She had been invited to speak about her pro bono work, and though she appreciated the opportunity, she felt out of place in the crowd of high-powered lawyers and philanthropists. She wasn't used to being the center of attention in such a setting. As she made her way through the event, her eyes scanned the room, and then, unexpectedly, she saw him. James stood near the back, dressed in a sleek black suit that seemed to fit him perfectly. He was talking with a few guests, but his eyes flickered toward her almost immediately. Their gazes met, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to fade away. He excused himself from the group and walked toward her, his presence calm and assured. "Sophia," he said with a smile, his voice warm but low. "I didn't expect to see you here." She smiled back, though it was a little tight. "I wasn't sure I'd be here either, to be honest. It's a bit overwhelming." James gave a soft laugh. "I know the feeling." He glanced around the room, his eyes scanning the crowd before he turned back to her. "You're doing amazing things, Sophia. I admire that." His words caught her off guard. It wasn't the first time he had praised her, but there was something in the way he said it this time that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. She looked at him, her gaze lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. They stood in silence for a moment, both of them feeling the weight of unspoken thoughts. "I've been thinking about what you said," she finally admitted. "About slowing down, taking a step back. I've always been so focused on my career that I haven't really thought about what I want outside of that. I'm not sure what to do with that." James nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "You don't have to have all the answers right away, Sophia. Just know that it's okay to ask yourself those questions. And whatever you choose, it's okay to change your mind along the way." His words gave her a strange sense of relief. It was as though he understood exactly what she was going through, the confusion, the pressure, the desire for something more, but not knowing how to reach for it. For a moment, the noise of the event faded into the background, and it was just the two of them standing there, connected by something deeper than words. Just then, one of the event organizers approached them, and the moment was broken. "Excuse me, Sophia," the woman said with a polite smile. "It's almost time for your speech." Sophia nodded, pulling herself together. "Thank you," she said, turning back to James. "I guess I should get ready." James gave her a nod, his eyes softening as he placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was both reassuring and intimate. "You've got this, Sophia. I'm proud of you." As he turned to walk away, Sophia felt a knot in her chest loosen. His words, simple as they were, filled her with a sense of strength she hadn't realized she had been missing. She watched him disappear into the crowd, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she didn't have all the answers. Maybe she didn't have to know exactly what she wanted right now. But one thing was certain. Whatever path she chose, she no longer felt alone in it. As she stepped up to give her speech, Sophia felt a new sense of clarity settle within her. She was ready to embrace the uncertainty, to explore the possibilities that lay ahead, and to take control of her own story. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew that James Carter, the man who had unknowingly shaken her world, was a part of that story now. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt like she was finally ready to find out. It had been a week since Sophia's speech at the charity event, and the weight of her decision to change direction in her life had begun to feel real. She had never been one to embrace uncertainty, but now, for the first time in years, she was starting to question everything she had built. She had been living her life on a clear path: work, success, promotions. But now, the idea of something more had crept in. James had helped her see that there was more to life than the endless pursuit of titles and accolades. The question that lingered in her mind was whether she was brave enough to step off the path she had carefully carved for herself. James had become a presence in her life she hadn't expected. Their interactions, while still guarded, had become more frequent. He no longer just checked in with polite texts or casual meetings. There were moments, like during their late-night phone calls or when they would meet for coffee, where the walls between them began to lower. Sophia found herself drawn to him, not because of his wealth or power, but because of the person he was beneath it all. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man who had built an empire out of necessity, but who still longed for something genuine. He shared stories about his childhood, his early days of struggle, and how he had come to view the world. He was a paradox, powerful and ruthless in business, but incredibly soft when it came to personal connections. One afternoon, after another long day at the office, Sophia found herself walking into a meeting that would change everything. She had been working with a client who had been involved in a complicated legal dispute, one that had been dragging on for months. Her boss had pushed her hard to close the deal, and today was supposed to be the day. As she walked into the conference room, she noticed a familiar face sitting across the table, James. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly reminded herself to stay professional. She hadn't expected to see him here. "I didn't know you were involved in this case," she said, keeping her voice even. James looked at her with a small, almost amused smile. "I didn't know you were either. But it seems we're on the same side today." Sophia tried to mask her surprise, but she couldn't ignore the sudden tension in the room. This wasn't just a case, it was a game changer. She had been working tirelessly to win this one, but now, with James on the other side, things felt different. As the meeting progressed, Sophia watched him closely. His demeanor was calm, calculated, and yet there was an underlying kindness to the way he interacted with everyone in the room. He wasn't the ruthless businessman she had imagined. He was firm, but fair. And as they hashed out the details, she began to see a side of him that she hadn't expected. After the meeting, Sophia stayed behind to review the case materials, her mind buzzing with the developments. She knew that James had power, but she had never truly understood how deeply it ran. She had been so focused on her own career and her own goals that she had missed how much influence he had over the entire industry. That night, as she sat in her office, going over notes and phone calls, she received a text from him. "I know this case is tough, but I believe in you," the message read. "You've got this." She stared at the message, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just that he had confidence in her. It was that he was showing up, supporting her, in ways that felt more genuine than anyone ever had before. As the days went on, Sophia and James continued to work together, their partnership becoming a seamless collaboration. But it wasn't just about the case anymore. They shared more personal moments, quiet dinners where they spoke about their dreams, their regrets, and the paths that had led them to where they were now. Each conversation revealed something new, something deeper. And each time they spoke, Sophia felt herself slowly unraveling the layers of her own guarded heart. It wasn't long before Sophia realized something she hadn't been ready to admit before. She had been afraid of what her feelings for James meant, afraid of what it would mean to open up to him. But as she spent more time with him, she realized that maybe she didn't need to have everything figured out. Maybe the answer wasn't about choosing between her career and her emotions. Maybe it was about finding a balance, about learning that there was room for both. One evening, after another long day at work, she found herself at a crossroads. She had been offered a promotion at the firm, a dream job that would require her to relocate to a new city. It was everything she had worked for, but something in her hesitated. As she stared at the offer in her hands, her phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "I'm thinking about you. I know you're facing a big decision. Whatever you choose, I'm here." His words were simple, but they hit her harder than she expected. She put the phone down and thought about everything she had been through. She had spent so many years chasing success, but now, standing at this crossroads, she realized that she was no longer running. The world wasn't just about titles and achievements anymore. It was about finding the people who mattered, the connections that made everything else seem smaller. The next day, she made her decision. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. She would take the promotion, but she would also take the time to explore what came next with James. She wasn't going to let fear control her choices anymore. As she walked out of the office for the last time, she felt a sense of clarity. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she was ready to embrace it, whatever it looked like. It had been a month since Sophia made the decision to accept the promotion, and life seemed to be moving in a direction she never thought possible. The balance she was trying to find between her career and her feelings for James was still a work in progress, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was walking in step with her life. The new job was everything she had ever wanted. More responsibility, more recognition, and a chance to make a real difference at the firm. But every time she thought about her future, she couldn't ignore the way James had become a constant presence in her thoughts. They had continued to grow closer. Their late-night talks, walks through the city, and shared silences had become moments she cherished. James had kept his distance in terms of pushing for anything more, but it was clear to her that he cared. She wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, she had started to fall for him. It wasn't just his power or his influence that attracted her. It was the vulnerability he let slip through when he spoke about his past, his loneliness, and the weight he carried every day. For someone who commanded so much respect and fear, he had a side to him that no one could see unless they were close enough to listen. It was this side of James that Sophia found herself drawn to. And yet, despite the growing connection between them, she was hesitant to take the next step. She had always been in control of her life, but now, with James in the picture, it was as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to take the leap. She spent the next few weeks throwing herself into her new role, hoping that the busy schedule would distract her from her growing feelings. But no matter how much she worked, her thoughts would always wander back to him. It was the way he looked at her, the subtle touches of affection, and the quiet moments they shared that made it impossible to forget him. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, Sophia found herself at a dinner with her colleagues. It was a corporate gathering, a chance for the firm to celebrate their recent success, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had been working so hard to prove herself, but she realized, sitting there in the midst of her colleagues, that she wasn't sure what she was working toward anymore. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down to see a message from James. "I'm thinking of you," it read. "I know this week has been tough. If you need a break, I'm here." The simplicity of the message, the way it showed he cared without asking for anything in return, made her heart skip a beat. She excused herself from the table, stepping out onto the balcony of the restaurant to get some air. The cool breeze against her face was refreshing, but it didn't stop her mind from racing. She had been so focused on climbing the ladder at work, on achieving everything she thought she was supposed to achieve, that she had forgotten about the parts of life that truly mattered. The love, the connections, the moments of real meaning. It was as if she had been running a race without even knowing why. Just then, her phone rang. It was James. She didn't hesitate. "Hey," she answered, stepping further into the night air. "I thought you might need to hear my voice," he said, his tone gentle, as if he knew exactly what she was feeling. "I always do," she replied, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at the sound of his voice. There was a pause, a brief moment of silence between them. "Are you happy, Sophia?" he asked softly. His words took her by surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I mean, you've worked so hard to get where you are, but are you truly happy?" he asked, as if the question had been lingering in his mind for a while. The question hit her harder than she expected. She had never really stopped to think about whether she was happy, not in the way he meant. She had been so focused on her goals, on proving herself, that she had never asked herself if this was what she really wanted. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice low. I think I've been so caught up in the idea of success that I forgot what it was all for. James was silent for a moment. You don't have to have everything figured out right now, he said finally. But don't forget to live, Sophia. Don't forget that there's more to life than the hustle. There's more to life than just surviving. She closed her eyes, taking in his words. In that moment, she realized that he was right. She had been surviving, not living. She had been focused so much on the next step, the next promotion, the next big thing, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. I'm scared, she confessed, the vulnerability in her voice surprising even herself. I'm scared of letting go, of trusting someone again. James' voice softened. You don't have to trust anyone but yourself, Sophia. But you deserve to let someone in. You deserve to experience the fullness of life. She stood there in silence, taking in everything he had said. For the first time in a long while, she felt like the weight she had been carrying was starting to lift. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was no longer going to live her life in the shadows of fear and uncertainty. She was going to step into the unknown, trusting that the choices she made would lead her to where she needed to be. And as she stood there, looking out at the city below, she realized that, for the first time, she was ready to embrace life fully, with all its messiness, its beauty, and its uncertainties. The days following their heart-to-heart conversation were filled with a new kind of quiet for Sophia. She had been grappling with her emotions, her thoughts clouded by the weight of her decision. James' words had sparked something in her, a realization that her pursuit of success had come at the cost of her happiness. For the first time in years, she was no longer focused on the next promotion or the next big project. Instead, she was thinking about what she truly wanted from her life. It wasn't just about the career anymore. She had begun to ask herself whether she was living for herself or for the expectations of others. That night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed. It was a message from James. I've been thinking about you. Let's take a step back and figure this out together. No pressure. Just us. Her heart raced as she read the message. He had been so patient, so understanding, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that they were both standing on the edge of something huge, something life-changing. Over the next few days, their conversations became more frequent, and James' presence in her life began to feel like a comforting constant. They talked late into the night, sometimes about the future, other times about their pasts, and sometimes about nothing at all. Each conversation revealed more about him, more about her. James, despite the walls he had built around himself, was showing her parts of him she had never expected to see. He spoke of his childhood, his rise to power, and the loneliness that had shaped him. For all his power and wealth, James had been driven by a need for something deeper, something he had never found. Until now. Sophia, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she hadn't done with anyone in years. She shared her fears, her doubts, her desires. In him, she found someone who listened, someone who didn't judge, someone who seemed to understand her in ways no one else did. But as their bond deepened, so did the conflict inside her. She was beginning to feel more than she had expected, more than she had prepared herself for. Love was never part of her plan. Her plan had always been about success, climbing the corporate ladder, proving herself, making a name in a world that wasn't always kind to women like her. She had never considered that love, of all things, could disrupt everything she had worked for. And yet, as she spent more time with James, she realized that her feelings for him were undeniable. She had fallen for him. It was something she couldn't control, no matter how hard she tried. One evening, after a particularly challenging day at the firm, Sophia found herself alone in her apartment, staring out at the city skyline. Her phone rang, and it was James. Are you free tonight? His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made her heart flutter. I could use some company, he added, as if reading her thoughts. She agreed to meet him at a small, quiet cafe they had frequented before, away from the prying eyes of the city's elite. When she arrived, James was already sitting at their usual table, his back to the door. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment, all of her worries melted away. You look beautiful, he said, his voice soft. Thank you, she replied, feeling a rush of warmth spread through her. She sat down across from him, the weight of the past few weeks still heavy on her mind. How are you? He asked, his gaze never leaving hers. I've been thinking a lot, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. About everything. James leaned forward, his expression gentle but knowing. What are you thinking? Sophia paused, unsure of how to articulate what she was feeling. I'm thinking that I've been running for so long, trying to make my life fit into a mold that I thought would make me happy, she began, her voice steady but unsure. But now I'm not so sure. I think I've been hiding from the truth. The truth that I'm scared. James reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers. The simple touch sent a wave of calm through her. It's okay to be scared, he said softly. I'm scared too. But we don't have to hide from it. We can face it together. Her heart swelled at his words. They were both standing on the edge of something uncertain, but for the first time, Sophia felt like it was okay to leap. I don't know what the future holds, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I know I don't want to face it alone. James' eyes softened, and for the first time, Sophia saw a vulnerability in him that mirrored her own. You don't have to face it alone, he said, his voice steady. We'll face it together, whatever it is. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. They were no longer just two people caught in the whirlwind of their own lives. They were two people choosing to walk through the uncertainty together. And in that moment, Sophia realized that the leap wasn't so scary after all. It wasn't about choosing between career and love, or between security and uncertainty. It was about embracing both, the challenges, the fears, the unknowns, and knowing that she didn't have to face it alone. As they sat there in the quiet cafe, hands still intertwined, Sophia knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change, and this time, she was ready for whatever came next. The days following their conversation at the cafe were a turning point for Sophia. As she and James began to navigate this new chapter together, she realized that she was no longer living solely for herself. She wasn't just the driven lawyer climbing the corporate ladder, nor was she the woman afraid to embrace what she truly wanted. With James by her side, she felt like she could finally be herself, vulnerable, open, and free from the constant need to prove her worth to the world. Their connection deepened with each passing day, but the road ahead wasn't without its challenges. Both of them had baggage, James with his empire built on secrecy and power, and Sophia with her fear of losing control over her life. It wasn't easy for either of them to trust fully, to let go of the walls they had so carefully constructed. But slowly, they learned how to support one another. One evening, as the winter chill settled over the city, Sophia stood by the window of her apartment, staring out at the skyline. She had just finished a call with her firm, and the weight of her responsibilities was starting to press on her again. She thought about James, about the journey they had taken together so far, and about the future they had talked about. Despite everything they had shared, there was one thing that still weighed heavily on her mind. She had never fully opened up about the things that had shaped her, the moments that had made her the woman she was today. She had never told him about her mother, the woman who had been her rock until she passed away unexpectedly. It was something Sophia had buried deep within her, a loss she had never really processed. The death of her mother had been the turning point in her life, the moment she had decided to shut herself off from the world and focus only on her career. It had been easier that way, less painful, less complicated. But now, as she stood in front of the window, she realized that the pain was still there, still lingering. And James, he deserved to know the truth. The truth about why she had built so many walls around herself. The truth about why she had pushed him away at times, even when she felt so drawn to him. Later that evening, as they met at one of their favorite quiet spots in the city, Sophia decided it was time. As they sat across from each other, sipping their drinks, she looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. James, she began, her voice steady but vulnerable, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Something I've never really shared with anyone. He looked at her, his expression softening, his full attention on her. You can tell me anything, Sophia, he said, his voice gentle. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before she spoke again. It's about my mom. She passed away a few years ago, unexpectedly. I didn't know how to handle it, so I buried myself in my work. I thought that if I kept pushing forward, I wouldn't have to face the pain. James reached across the table, his hand gently covering hers, a silent gesture of support. I'm sorry for your loss, he said softly. You've been through so much, and I can't imagine how hard it must have been for you. The sincerity in his words made her heart ache, but it also made her feel lighter, like she was finally able to share a piece of herself she had kept hidden for so long. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's just, I never really let myself grieve. And now, I'm afraid that I've built so many walls that I don't know how to take them down." James squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to take them down all at once. Just take it one step at a time. I'm here with you, Sophia. You don't have to do this alone." His words settled in her heart, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe. She had been so afraid of letting herself feel, of opening up to someone else, but James had shown her that it was okay to lean on someone. It was okay to be vulnerable, and it was okay to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. As they left the cafe that night, hand in hand, Sophia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she was no longer afraid to face it. With James by her side, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next. Together, they had already begun to build something real, something that was more than just power, success, or ambition. It was a connection grounded in trust, understanding, and love, a love that was just beginning to unfold. Weeks passed and the foundation of Sophia and James' relationship grew stronger with every shared moment. They had begun to craft a new kind of life together, one built on trust, understanding, and the kind of deep connection that neither of them had anticipated. As Sophia continued to settle into her new role at the firm, her work-life balance gradually became more manageable. She was still driven, still ambitious, but now there was room in her heart for something beyond the hustle. James, too, seemed to find peace in their shared time, no longer burdened by the isolation he had once felt. They spent their evenings talking, walking through the city streets, or simply enjoying quiet moments in the comfort of their home. It was a life they were building together, step by step, day by day. But it wasn't always easy. James' world was one of constant scrutiny and the weight of his family's expectations. As the leader of his empire, there were always those who wanted something from him. People who would stop at nothing to take advantage of his power. Despite the calm that had settled between them, Sophia couldn't ignore the tension that sometimes seeped into his demeanor when the topic of his past came up. He still carried the weight of his decisions, the choices he had made to protect his empire at the cost of his own happiness. And she understood. She knew that for James, opening up to her wasn't easy. But each time he did, each time he shared a piece of his heart with her, she felt closer to him. One evening, after a particularly difficult day where James had been dealing with a family dispute, they sat together on the balcony of their apartment, looking out over the city. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, and the cool night air felt refreshing. "I never imagined I'd have a life like this," James said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "A life where I can just be." Sophia turned to him, her heart swelling with affection. "You deserve this," she replied, her voice full of sincerity. "You deserve peace, and you deserve happiness, no matter what anyone else thinks." James looked at her, his eyes full of emotion. "I know," he said, "but it's hard to believe it sometimes. My whole life, I've been taught that I have to be in control, that I can't show weakness. But with you, I don't feel like I have to hide anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. In that moment, Sophia realized just how far they had come. They had both been broken in different ways, but together, they were beginning to heal. Their love had become a sanctuary, a place where they could shed their burdens and simply be themselves. "You don't have to hide with me," she said, her voice steady and filled with affection. "You never have to pretend. I'm here, James. Always." The silence between them was filled with understanding. And for the first time, Sophia knew that no matter what the future held, she wasn't going to face it alone. The next morning, as the sunlight streamed through the windows, Sophia woke up to find James already up, preparing coffee in the kitchen. She smiled to herself, feeling a warmth spread through her as she watched him move around the kitchen with ease. He had come a long way from the man she had first met, the cold, distant Mafia boss who had appeared in her life like a shadow. Now, he was someone she could rely on, someone she could trust with her heart. They had built something beautiful, something real, and it was theirs to nurture. As they sat down to breakfast, the conversation turned to their plans for the future. They talked about moving in together permanently, about finding a place that felt like home for both of them, a place where they could build a life, not just for themselves, but for the future they both wanted. It was a dream they hadn't dared to imagine before, but now it felt possible. "I think we're ready," James said, his voice full of determination. "Ready for what?" Sophia asked, her curiosity piqued. "To take the next step. To stop holding back," he said, looking her in the eyes. "I want to build a future with you, Sophia. I don't want to wait any longer." His words were exactly what she had been hoping to hear. She smiled, her heart racing with anticipation. "I'm ready too," she said, taking his hand. "Let's build something together." The decision was made. They were ready to face the future, side by side, no more running from their pasts or their fears. Together, they had already created something beautiful, something built on trust, love, and the willingness to take risks for each other. And as they looked out toward the future, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, hand in hand, ready for whatever life had in store.